welcome, Jonathan, again to all of our viewers. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences and share professionalism with us. It's just we appreciate the time that you take.
No, thanks for having me.
To start, I mean, again, a little intro. For me, I'm Manan Asfashvili. I'm here to representing Morphosis. A little bit of context. Today's webinar is going to be, well, it's titled "From Skill Gaps to Career Growth: Mastering Upskilling and Reskilling for Success in the Modern Workforce." So we're going to talk about everything upskilling, reskilling. Jonathan will also share his experience with upskilling or reskilling in his workplaces, as well as discuss a little bit of why it's so important, why both of these are so important for career growth and success. So as a rough outline, we'll take around 40 minutes, and then we'll leave some time for questions, but the actual, webinar dialogue is going to be roughly 40 minutes. So without further ado, Jonathan, I mean, I gave quite a long intro of myself. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience, and maybe one fun hobby.
Awesome. No, thanks, Manana. So, yeah, hi everyone. Lovely to be here. So, I'm Jonathan Evans. I'm currently an HR business partner. I work for AstraZeneca. I guess my role today is I lead and then execute the people strategy for a major transformation program within the AstraZeneca organisation, which is called Upskill. I've been enrolled for just over 2 years, and I've been in HR leadership positions for about 3.5 years. But my background actually was in executive recruitment and headhunting. So I suppose from a skills perspective, my career has always been about finding individuals with in-demand skills, maybe earlier on, and then latterly thinking about how skills are kind of deployed in the service of business objectives. So yeah, in very brief terms, that's me.
Thank you so much for sharing your background. We really appreciate it. Now, to get to the main topic and the main theme, and to kind of ease ourselves into it, in your opinion, what are the key differences between your traditional skill development and the upskilling and reskilling needed for the modern workplace?
Yeah, so I think in the simplest possible terms, going back a period of time, skill development was really emphatically about the kind of accumulation or increasing aptitude in technical skills. So it was very much about growing your ability to be effective, but perhaps in a sort of more narrow technical domain. An example would be accountancy. You'd build accreditations, qualifications, ongoing skills. You'd apply those skills in different elements, but you'd be building, ever higher sort of domain knowledge, if you like. I suppose where we are today is the kind of upskilling and reskilling we're looking for is different, maybe in two ways. Firstly, it's the speed at which technical skills are kind of waxing and waning, and I'm sure we'll dig into some of that and maybe some specifics later. And that's about what is needed by businesses and organisations to achieve business objectives, if you like. But maybe secondly, and more importantly, I would say the emphasis is now much more on what might be called soft skills or capabilities. There's a lot of debate about terminology and language and skills for anyone who's been involved in it. I'm sure that's a common theme. But in essence, what we're talking about are a kind of common set of skills that an organisation would sort of bet on, that they'd want all of their employees to have. And again, I'm sure we'll dig into this a lot. But that is, a significant change from the sort of technical skills being the real focus to more of the kind of softer skills and capabilities, perhaps being where organizations are investing more time these days.
No, you mentioned soft skills quite a few times, and you mentioned, the shift in the skills that people are paying attention to now. Looking back at your experience in talent scouting and acquisition, and also like capability building, what qualities or competencies or soft skills do you believe have consistently, or in your observation, have consistently defined high potential employees? And also, are these changing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think I wouldn't say necessarily changing is the right word, but becoming more emphasized. And they're the really, really human elements of what people can bring, as opposed to perhaps what AI can deliver in terms of getting work done. So I suppose, the one really common threads around high potential individuals and leaders that I've worked with, whether in recruitment or in HR, is curiosity. It's absolutely the kind of standout common threads. And you can't describe that as a hard technical skill, right? That is absolutely a soft skill or a capability or whatever we want to call it, or just a mindset as much as anything. Um, but I think that is absolutely common amongst the best leaders that I've known and worked with. I would say often it's kind of innate. People have it naturally, but that's not to say that it can't be developed. It needs to be nurtured. It needs to be protected. Everyone is extremely busy at all times, but I think having that curiosity to find out more, and then carving out time to invest in that curiosity, to feed that curiosity, in terms of what that means for your own development, how you can sort of use that curiosity to horizon scan what might be coming next. I think that's absolutely a standout across all of the different people in different industries that I've interacted with. And then the other piece is kind of situational, or maybe what's more called adaptive leadership now, and that is really the ability to understand how to show up as a leader in different situations. We can dig into that in more detail as well. But again, that's absolutely a common thread amongst the best and most high potential leaders that I've come across.
I mean, you've just given such a wonderful statement of what, starting with why upskilling and reskilling is so important, right? Times are changing, technology's shifting, right? With AI development, actually, so many technical skills have already been replaced. So I definitely agree and share your perspective. I think curiosity would be the one thing I notice shining most in my industry and in my domain as well, in my fields. Now, on that note, also, in your view, what are the primary, well, so to say, barriers to effective reskilling in large organizations? How could companies support employees who need to adapt to these new roles or skills and technological advancements?
Yeah, I think time, time is the barrier. Time is always the enemy, right? Uh, there's never enough of it, and protecting it is very, very difficult. We're all expected to do more and more in our roles and within our organizations as well, I guess. I mean, ultimately it's down to individuals. So again, that curiosity, I think, is what informs people to carve that time out, to really think about what reskilling means for them individually within the context of working in a large organization. But it's also for managers and leaders to create that space. And I guess ultimately, when leaders in organizations of whatever size or whatever industry make that space, what they're really doing is creating a kind of culture of lifelong learning. That is very much the way that I think about upskilling, reskilling, learning and development. Investing in people is always going to pay dividends, but especially just given the pace of change. We are changing faster in so many ways than historically has been the case. So organisations are just as incentivized as individuals to create and curate that culture of lifelong learning to help people change and adapt to what's going to be needed next. And I think then you have that kind of mindset at an organizational, a managerial, a leadership, and an individual level, that you're never standing still. There's an expectation, but also an understanding of what it takes to upskill, and also the context to understand what it means. Right? It's not a task in and for itself. It's towards particular objectives for the employee in terms of a sort of IDP, a development plan, but also for the organisation, again linking back to achieving business objectives.
I love the phrase that you use, investing in people always pays in dividends. I really like that because I definitely share that perspective. Now, another thing is, well, yes, time is the biggest enemy, right? And waits for no one, right? It's truly just another form of currency. So on that note, I'm very curious to hear your perspective on how would you go about prioritizing which skills to upskill or reskill, given how important time is and how difficult it is to actually prioritize, especially in large companies.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. It's quite difficult to answer because we live in an age where there's so much information that you can kind of get lost just trying to do some analysis on what you should be prioritizing. It's like an interesting catch-22. But I guess there's always going to be specific industry bodies from a technical skills point of view. So if you're into a pathway for accounting, you can go and look at an ACA or whatever, and they're incentivized themselves to stay ahead of the trend in terms of upskilling and reskilling in that particular area. But there's also a whole bunch of materials that are out there and free and available. So things like the World Economic Forum report on the future of jobs, that was the most recent version was published, I think, just under a month ago. And what that's really going to do is help you to understand what is trending and what perhaps is sort of declining somewhat in terms of skills that are going to form part of jobs of the future. And if you really want to get into the detail and into the weeds, there's a bunch of stuff out there as well. So there's open source platforms like Lightcast. They're collecting data on many thousands of open job adverts, and then they're using that data to effectively say, all right, this is a kind of taxonomy of future skills versus declining skills. So it really depends what you want your focus to be and how much time you want to invest in it. But again, we've got kind of unparalleled access to information out there. I think we'll probably come to it in a bit later on. There are always going to be some universal sort of capabilities, if you like, that are always going to be worth investing in. But that's not always going to be about sitting down and saying, okay, I'm going to do an online course to get an accreditation in this. It probably is going to look very different in terms of upskilling and reskilling for some of those softer skills or broader capabilities.
Definitely. And you now covered the individual aspect of this, where like as a person, as a young professional, as someone that wants to stand out or wants to keep up with the trends, the things that we could do. But then what about on a more leadership scale, let's say? So how could a leader foster a culture of continuous learning within their teams?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things, but it all comes down to showing as well as telling, if that makes sense. So it really is about role modeling the kind of behaviors, the attitudes, and also relaying one's own experiences in a really authentic way, because it's not a kind of linear pathway. It's not a if you do this you're guaranteed to be successful in that outcome. We all know that the reality of how careers develop are zigzags rather than straight lines, right? So I think leaders who are able to communicate that and help their teams understand and almost put into context what that'll mean for them. Obviously, there's creating the space, and again, going back to that creation of a kind of learning culture is really important. But I do think that kind of authentic role modeling piece that I've seen the best leaders do is the most impactful, as well as sparing time themselves to have those conversations, to take on mentorship roles. But I think it really is about, demonstrating the kind of values through behaviours, which both allow people the space to take the time to sort of reskill or upskill, if that's the right phrase, but also that authenticity of sort of telling their own story about what's worked for them, what hasn't, etc.
So on that note, then what would you say are the best ways to encourage employees to acquire these skills outside of their immediate roles?
Yeah, I think again, context is really critical. There has to be a reason to do all of these kind of activities. And again, I'd come back to that needs to be a kind of combination. So it needs to be linked to an individual development plan for sure. And this is where leaders and line managers. We ask a lot of managers in this day and age, because yes, it's about ensuring that work is done, that objectives are delivered, for a business unit or an organisation as well. But it's also that kind of coaching relationship with individuals to really help people understand and unpack what their objectives are. Because if if people are like me, I still don't have a firm objective of where I want to get to, and I certainly didn't 5 years ago. But working with some great managers and leaders, we've developed some development actions plans, ways of sort of upskilling that have sort of moved things forward, as it were. And I think that's where really great managers as well as leaders make the difference. But then it's really about helping people understand what reskilling means. So yeah, again, coming back to I'm going to do a course to get a technical skill and accreditation. That is important, but actually, I would say that the weighting on experiential development is higher than ever, and getting exposure into different environments, different teams, different cultures is ever more important as well. So I think helping people to understand that yes, acquiring skills is about education, but it's also about experience and exposure. I think that's really, really critical. And I think when people, really understand that, they get a lot more, enjoyment out of what they're doing as well, because they can link that project that they're doing now to a much longer term objective of their own.
Definitely, and also the feeling of actually growing and learning something new is always refreshing and adds to the general motivation of individuals who are, typically absorbed in routine tasks. So then learning something new is like a novel, a glimmer, something shiny. So it's always pleasant. Now, you mentioned the differences between cultures, and also naturally, I mean, the first association that came to me, cultures, cohorts, generations, whether it's generationally or culturally, I've personally experienced there's some resistance to change and resistance to learning or upskilling or reskilling because for the same reasons, right? When someone is absorbed in a routine, they're comfortable in their space, they know what they're doing, they know, they have their zone of control and their zone of competence, so they struggle with stepping out. Do you agree? What's your experience in terms of that? What would your advice be to some people that might be struggling with, embracing a little bit of chaos and stepping out of their comfort zone for the sake of upskilling?
Yeah, and I think for me, it's I, I don't like to generalize at all, really, because my experience with different generations, different cultures has been so different and so diverse. Now, maybe there are some differences in expectations, particularly around, how people learn, how people consume content. Maybe you can say that younger generations want more sort of modular, bite-sized, learning. Maybe older generations want more sort of classroom curated learning. But again, even that assumption, I think, is often disproved as proved. And I think also you can set yourself up in my sort of role for getting it completely wrong by making assumptions. I mean, I was at an event a couple of months ago where somebody made such a great point that actually it may be your older generations, it may be your millennials plus, who are actually better at adopting AI in work because they've been through more change. If you think about people who've been working for 25, 30 years, they'll have been working adopting computers and then mobile phones and the internet and then smartphones, as opposed to somebody who may only have been 5 years in the workplace and really hasn't seen a change in the way that AI is going to change how jobs are done. So I think making assumptions is always sort of slightly dangerous. I think trying to kind of bring together different generations and different cultures when you're starting to understand how to design programs for learning and development on how to assist people with upskilling is really critical. And I do think that there is always going to be change aversion, and it may show up differently in different generations. But I think a lot of the time, the root of it is the same. A lot of the time, it's about misunderstanding or I suppose lacking in context as to what I should be doing regarding reskilling and why I should be doing it. And I think underneath that as well often is a lot of vulnerability, right? It's never easy to admit, even to oneself sometimes, that actually maybe I do need to reskill this. Maybe the way that I've been doing things isn't the way that things will be done. Maybe what got me here won't get me there. Those are all all really challenging psychological concepts. And I think really, again, it's down to leaders to create an environment of psychological safety, and really, use that to encourage people to express where they may have doubts about, taking on that effort to reskill or upskill.
First of all, I love the fresh perspective of, older generations might actually be more apt to reskill and upskill, because it's definitely true. They have more experience. They've seen more, you know, throughout their entire professional journey. They've seen more change than someone that's immediately jumping into this pool of chaos and immediately starting to, absorb all the information. So I love that fresh perspective. And on the topic of change adoption, I meant change adoption and change aversion. I agree that change aversion manifests differently in different, generations, cultures, but on an individual level even. But now if we sort of put this in the frame of a workplace, right? Think of it more as how the workplace and how for example, managers could support this process of upskilling and reskilling. What strategies do you think work best for embedding the reskilling into day-to-day workflows for employees?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and something spent a lot of time thinking about. So there's there's always some practical investments and bets in making it as easy as possible. So I think the way that various tech platforms have increased ease of access and the kind of modularization of learning has been pretty revolutionary over the last 5 to 10 years, and most organizations like mine will have invested very heavily in that, and then again in creating a culture where people have the space and the support to go through that. But again, I think it comes back to contextualizing the other elements of in the flow of work development that people might not even be aware is going on. And I think again, it's that experience and that exposure, and I think that's a really interesting challenge about how to frame that effectively for people. So this can be as basic as individuals may be leading on a project for the first time and finding it very, very, very difficult. And they may be focusing on that difficulty rather than focusing on the fact that they are upskilling themselves enormously in how to bring diverse stakeholder groups with different objectives together, creating win-wins, improving their strategic communication skills. All of that will be kind of probably secondary in the moment, where they're feeling certain amounts of pain because they're finding it difficult to drive through a project with multiple stakeholders in the first time. So helping to contextualize that. And I think one of the ways that works really well in that is to ensure that there's a regular kind of check-in process. So in my organization, we have a kind of quarterly check-in cycle, again with managers, and I think that's very different to the old school. You try and get to the end of the year, try and remember everything you've done, try and put that into a performance management context. It really is about that much more regular feedback and feed forwards, but again, very much in the service of experiential development and giving people exposure into different environments. So I think again, it's a little bit of that strategy of creating a lifelong learning culture, but also the kind of mechanics of putting a process in place where managers and employees have those kind of regular points where they can step back and reflect, and then it's about supporting both of those kind of archetypes, if you like, both employees and managers, in how to get the best out of those conversations. So I think it's embedding a culture of coaching as well within managers and leaders, but also really getting individuals to take full ownership of their own development, because nobody else can do it for you. That is absolutely the bottom line. I think organizations are investing more than ever in development and upskilling and reskilling, but back to that curiosity piece, it is only the individual who can decide what and how much they're going to invest in developing themselves and upskilling themselves for what they want to do next.
No, you mentioned a lot about embedding a culture of continuous learning, right? And being exposed to different situations, people, right, context, etc. I mean, definitely this adds to the enrichment of any individual. But regardless, I mean, of course, there's some discomfort associated with embracing the chaos, and it takes a lot of tolerance to the uncertainty and openness to being able to receive this information, and a lot of other soft skills like growth mindset, for example, and curiosity that you mentioned before. Naturally, this would benefit everyone. But now, when we talk about more young professionals, right, people that perhaps have not yet had this exposure, the just simply not did not have the opportunity yet to have these experiences. What have you, in your experience, what are the most significant skill gaps that you've noticed in such young professionals, and have you noticed any differences across industries where the gaps are more pronounced?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I don't have vast amounts of experience with the kind of latest generation per se. Although, having said that, working for a global company, it's about 20 countries that we work with, in many different markets. It's this sort of Gen Z and expanding generation, and the levels of enthusiasm and engagement are off the charts, frankly, in my experience there. So there's no negativity, but I think in general terms, there are a few core capabilities that I always think are worth investing in. So I think one is really that kind of root cause analysis approach and mentality. And I think this is going to be ever more important in the age of AI as well, because it's not necessarily about being the best person in terms of doing hardcore analytics. It's much more about being able to understand what is working and what isn't at kind of a systems level, really. So really being able to get underneath complexity, especially in larger organizations, and understand actually what is at the root of the problem or the challenge that you're encountering. And I think that requires again curiosity, to kind of go above and beyond, right? So it's not a case of you're going to be told you do these 7 steps and then you get to the answer. It's going to be, right, here's a problem, over to you, go and see if you can actually unpack what's really behind it. So I think every time you get an opportunity as a young person to go and do something difficult, you should absolutely do it, because that's where you build that ability to do a really effective root cause analysis. And I think the other side of that really is around stakeholder engagement. And this is where the multi-generational thing perhaps is starkest, because I mean, for me, coming up, so what am I now, 41? Give away what generation I am. I think I'm just about a millennial, but at the top end of it. The stakeholder engagement piece was very much about picking up the phone, trying to, in my early days, win business through engaging directly with people, having a conversation, trying to extract what their potential problem was, and then trying to effectively sell a way of solving it for them. That is just invaluable experience that I had very early in my career, that is then repurposed in many different ways, because my job is so much about interacting with different stakeholders with completely different agendas, different priorities, different ways of thinking about things, different cultures. I think really being able to put yourself into different environments as much as possible, as early as possible, will pay dividends. And again, a lot of the time, it may be uncomfortable. You may be putting yourself in a situation where either you're communicating in a format that doesn't come naturally, so whether that's in face and over the phone versus via messaging, whatever. Push yourself in that direction is my strong advice, and it will come back enormously. And I think also you'll get more back from people in terms of a sort of reciprocity principle as well, right? So if you're seen to be investing the time in building those relationships, as you work in these different areas and try and solve problems from a root cause perspective, that will build really enduring, rich relationships that will create a network for you that you will rely on inevitably, later on in your career. So aside from just the pure, upskilling and capability building, don't underestimate the power of the network that you'll be building by investing in that kind of stakeholder engagement as well.
Extremely valuable advice, truly. I mean, for me as well, and in my personal belief too, a lot of learning actually happens more through social interaction than it does through just someone telling you step by step process of some sorts. I mean, naturally, technical skills, they are invaluable. I mean, no one would doubt that. But especially in today's day and age, and I mean, who knows what's going to happen five years down the line, technical skills, information for technical skills is available online, just at your fingertips. Just type it out now, especially with how easy it is to learn and to have AI teach you. Actually, naturally it still stays invaluable, but as you were discussing the value of exposure and the value of having these diverse experiences, I started to wonder, are we perhaps, or are organizations overemphasizing technical skills, even when it comes to whether it's regarding upskilling and reskilling, or whether it's in the hiring process? Do you think we are at this point overemphasizing technical skills at the expense of soft skills? And
But I think a lot of the time, hiring managers are. So, and I think it's for a variety of reasons. There's a great safety in hiring for technical skills, and actually just experience as well. And I think a lot of young people, suffer, more than others from this. The amount of um, posts I've seen on various platforms about jobs being advertised as entry level, but then needing X years of experience doing something really specific is kind of emblematic of that. So if you put yourself in the shoes of a hiring manager, again, this is a lot about psychological safety, I would say. But it's very easy to go, okay, we are working on this. It's on this platform system, language, whatever. I'm going to go and hire somebody who's got 10 years of experience, doing this system, platform, language, and therefore everything will be fine. Now, that's, not necessarily true, because as we all know, as we've just talked about, the ability to problem solve, network, engage, manage complexity, manage ambiguity, these are all just as important, arguably more important than raw technical experience and skill. So I think that there's a great deal of effort going into educating and upskilling hiring managers in how to assess talent, frankly, and that cascades down into different industries like the recruitment industry, and dare I say even LinkedIn as well. So I think it's a really interesting paradigm, because it's easier to code for technical skills and to assess for technical skills than it is for soft skills, right? So you can say with a high degree of probability, whether somebody has an ability to code in a particular language, and you can say whether they've got the ability to stakeholder manage within my organization. So there's always going to be a temptation to revert back to those softer skills. But I think, when most people reflect, actually, it is those softer skills and capabilities that make the difference between people who are more effective and less effective.
definitely, I mean, skills like, I mean, logic, problem solving, right? And creativity, critical thinking, curiosity. I mean, all of these things combined, if they are present in an individual, that means that they will have the capacity to upskill in technical skills whenever the opportunity arises.
And I think learning agility more than anything else, right? So I think again that is
Definitely.
literally that ability to to pivot and pick up new areas of expertise, but also to kind of apply experience and even technical skills in a different domain, in a different scenario. That is really what it's all about, just given the pace of change. Now, I don't want to underemphasize the importance of technical skills, by the way, because that's just that's a red herring as well. That's just it's not going to be a case that the organisations are not going to need people with real depth of technical expertise. But by the same token, as you kind of observe yourself, the sort of AI revolution as we get into agentic AI and agents, that ability to call up more and more technical information and even do some of the technical connecting and problem solving probably does increase, and therefore the emphasis is ever more on the human sides. What is a pure human task or activity? What is a kind of human supervised AI task and activity? And what is a pure AI task and activity? These are all questions that will be asked, in the coming years.
Now, since you touched upon the topic of AI just now, just how do you think individuals or organizations can stay resilient and adaptable in this period of such, rapid disruptions, like industry-wide disruptions that, automation and AI has caused?
Yeah, I think firstly, remember it's happened before. So this is what the
Mm.
fourth industrial revolution. If you're a cotton spinner in 1780s Manchester, you'd probably be feeling, similar thoughts to where you may be sitting in an information job today. So it's no different. The speed perhaps is different, but we'll see. There's a concept called Martek's law, which states that technology changes fast, exponentially. Companies, organizations change slow, logarithmically. I don't buy into it completely, but it's not to say people can take it easy. But the pace of change versus the pace of adoption is always sort of slightly overemphasized, I would say. So there's a lot of change that's going to happen, but I do think fundamentally what is going to be ever more emphasized is the human dimension of things. It's not going to be just machines talking to machines in future. It's going to be about that ability to really understand, frame, communicate the challenge, the problem, bring people with you. All of these human capabilities that we talked a lot about in the last half hour or so, those become more prominent rather than less prominent. And arguably, that's really exciting because there is a lot of work in our jobs today that perhaps isn't the most fun. So being able to unlock some of that through AI, rather than having to input it all ourselves, to free us up to concentrate on, the more human, the more strategic elements of what we do. There's some real positives in there as well.
Definitely. And I mean, change is what breeds motivation also is also true, right? Because again, it's something shiny, it's new. It creates an environment of excitement. So definitely I agree. But then disruption on the other hand, right? Too much change then breeds anxiety potentially. So then on that note, how do you recommend or what advice would you give to again young professionals who are either struggling with the anxiety associated with such disruptions, and then also what advice would you give them to anticipate disruptions in their fields and perhaps proactively build the skills that they will need to thrive in the future?
It's a really difficult question because I don't think anyone knows. I think if anyone tells you exactly what skills you should be building for the future, you should probably ask the question, how do they know, rather than others. As we talked about at the start, you can do a load of research. You can go and look at WEF data or a bunch of similar stats, and really that is an action of horizon scanning, and that is a part of curiosity. So I think carve out that time to spend time, researching and trying to understand in your sort of broad aspiration direction of travel, what is it that looks like the skills that you should be investing in, but don't do that to excess. Ultimately, you've got to kind of be able to let go of the future a little bit, because it's all too easy to become obsessed by hypothesizing about what may happen
Definitely.
at the expense of what's right in front of you. And this is where it's back to that experiential development and that exposure into different environments, working with different people. I think a lot of the time, the hardest part for young people is getting the foot through the door. My experience of working with younger generations is once they're in, the enthusiasm, if they've got the right curiosity, the right approach, then pathways unfolds, and those pathways might be completely different to what you plotted for yourself initially. So I think to take a healthy amount of time to look at what you want to prioritize and scan for the future, but also be opportunistic. Don't turn things down because it doesn't feel like it's on your absolute pathway to where you want to end up, unless you've really analysed what that opportunity is, for what else might be there, what capabilities it might build for you.
Love that piece of advice, right? It's always important to strike that balance, right? Find that golden middle, right? That line between, exactly, to know not to overemphasize focus, or not to over focus on the future, but also just accept opportunities as they come, and go with the flow a little more while embracing the change that is inevitably going to come. Now, as we are approaching the end of our time, and I have one more question left just based on your experience, I want to encourage the viewers, if any of you have any questions of your own, you can just pop it in the comments, and as soon as we're done, so within the next 2 minutes, we will address those questions as well. Now, on that note, the one last question that I have is, do you have an example of, or maybe perhaps examples of mentorship initiatives that have been particularly impactful in fostering skill growth and upskilling?
Yeah, I think again, back to that kind of culture piece. In my organisation, there is a culture of mentorship that is kind of enabled at scale within the organisation, and I think that's the best possible example I can think of, because in my own experience, I have mentored and been mentored by people from different countries, different parts of the business, with completely different perspectives. And again, at scale, that's happened within the organisation. And I think what that's created at kind of a macro scale for the business is just vast exchange of ideas and approaches, and ultimately innovation and creativity. That's what it's all about. We're in an innovation business at all levels, whether that's about science or about other things. And I think I've really seen that work with individuals in different parts of kind of my sector of HR. So I've experienced it myself in moving from talent acquisition into HR, by being mentored by an HR professional, and really almost being given the confidence that I could do it, as well as advice on where to upskill myself. And then vice versa, I mentored somebody who is a absolutely phenomenal performer, way better than me, frankly. But from a market, so working in in a sort of commercial entity, which is very much end to end. But working with her from a group perspective, which again is very, very different. You have a very different mindset when you're sitting in a kind of group center role. So those exchanges, again, yes, they're about where to bet and invest personally on what skills, but they are much more about the experiential and exposure elements. Let's come back to it one more time. As I reflect on it, it's being able to challenge and provide different perspectives in the best possible way, about how you can reuse and redeploy your skills, as much as it is about where you should invest in upskilling or reskilling.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience and sharing your perspectives, as well as such invaluable pieces of advice. And I hope that the viewers have learned as much as I have, because as we're finishing this webinar, I'm definitely going to go look into opportunities, embrace the change as they come, and just be more open at the very least to acquiring all these experiences. Oh, actually, we have one question just now. Inaya asked, "Hello, how can I assess my skill gaps effectively?"
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, not to digress too much, but there's a kind of technology race between a number of kind of skills platforms that are looking at how to use skills inferencing and then skills assessment against business need and business requirement. That does flow through even on platforms like LinkedIn, because if you spend a bit of time with that kind of ruthless honesty, filling out LinkedIn from a skills perspective, so what skills and experience do you have, you can then match that against a job that's being posted, and it will show up where you have matching skills and where you have gaps. So that exists on LinkedIn as a platform. There'll be much more of those types of platforms for individual employers. and for sort of different industry sectors as well. So I just have a start by using the functionality in LinkedIn. To be honest, it's very easy and very intuitive, and it'll kind of get you thinking about how to self-describe a skill. The kind of assessment level of proficiency is more difficult, but have a start with LinkedIn and then compare it against where there may be some jobs posted that you aspire to.
Wonderful answer. We have one more question coming from Steph, who says, "Hello, Jonathan. I find there's a great challenge with organizations to persuade employees that upskilling is not just about them becoming a better employee for the company or a checkbox, rather for their own development and future employability. Any thoughts on this?"
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I think the phrase "you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink" does come out sometimes. I feel very fortunate. I think in my organisation, by and large, the attitude is very, very positive. But again, I think that's the result of many years of investment from all elements of leadership. Yes, HR, but really more the business, because I think it's when the business again role models authentically the results of investing in oneself, from an upskilling or just general development perspective, when there's that perception of kind of fairness behind it as well, that employees will kind of believe that to a greater extent. And I've seen it honestly with the most authentic of leaders. The most authentic of leaders will say, I want you to upskill for yourself, and I want you to develop in this company. But if you upskill yourself and you end up going somewhere else, I still see that as a success. I've seen the best and most authentic leaders take that approach, which is really kind of walking the walk as well as talking the talk.
I think a leader that shows that they truly care about you on an individual level is definitely someone that, as an employee or as a person, you build much more trust and respect for as well. So definitely my favorite managers have been exactly the kinds that you've described. So to any managers or aspiring managers that are watching or leaders that are watching, do take that to heart. Everyone appreciates when you care about them on an individual level. Again, since we are at time now and that was the last question that we had, Jonathan, thank you so much for the experiences that you've shared, the perspectives that you've shown us, and for taking the time again to be here. It has been wonderful to have you as a guest speaker on the Morphosis webinar series.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Manana. Thanks for having me.
Have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you and we can collaborate again in the future.